The sun hung like a brand above the town of perdition, scorching the cracked boards of Main Street and casting warped shadows across the warped souls who filled it. At the very center of that dust-blown square stood a rough-hewn auction block worn smooth by boots, blood, and the weight of human shame. But today it wasn't cattle or land being sold, it was a woman in white. Her habit, once clean and reverent, now hung tattered and dust-streaked from her frame. Shackles bit into her wrists. Her feet were bare ankles bruised from the iron. And still she stood straight, chin up, eyes clear. Sister Evelyn Grace, a woman of God in chains, stared out at the crowd like she was the one judging them. Men howled their bids through whiskey breath and sun-scorched grins. $50 one called. 75 barked another, licking cracked lips like he was eyeing a hog roast. The auctioneer, a bloated brute named Jed Granger, seized Evelyn's chin in his hand and turned her face toward the mob. "Look at this, gents," he boomed. "Pure as snow from the convent roof. Obedient, quiet, raised in holiness. That's worth your coin." Laughter rolled across the crowd like thunder, but not everyone was laughing. Leaning against the doorway of Perdition's saloon, a tall man swirled the last inch of whiskey in his glass. Colt Mercer was no stranger to depravity. He'd walked through more blood than most outlaws could even imagine. But this made his skin crawl in ways that even the deepest killings never had. 27 notches on his belt, and not one of those deaths twisted his gut like seeing that nun treated like livestock. Colt took a slow drink, burned his throat, didn't help. Then she looked at him. Across the sea of dust, grime, and noise, Evelyn's gaze met his steady, unflinching. There were no tears, no begging, just stillness. And something else, not hope, not fear, a quiet kind of challenge, as if to ask him what kind of man he really was. It hit him like a punch. He'd seen that same look before, long ago, on the face of a girl he hadn't been able to save. Colt set down his glass. His fingers drifted toward the revolver holstered on his hip. He'd promised himself years ago never to play the hero again. Too many good men buried trying to save people who didn't want saving. But this woman, she stood there broken and yet somehow more whole than the town around her. 200 Colt called out, his voice slicing through the noise like a blade. The bidding stopped. Every eye turned toward him. A hush fell over the crowd. Even Granger's hand froze in midair, the hammer half raised. A name traveled like wildfire through whispers: Colt Mercer. They all knew that name. But before Jed could drop the gavel, a deeper voice rolled in from the edge of the square. 500, it said. A shadow stepped from a velvet black carriage, dressed in a charcoal suit, boots, polished to a mirror, and a cane topped with silver. Augustus Gus Vane, lord of half the territory by fear and the other half by blood. Colt Mercer, Vane said with a grin full of gold teeth. "Didn't expect you to show up for Sunday service." Evelyn's head turned toward the new voice, and for the first time a flicker of fear darkened her face. Colt felt his jaw lock tight. Of all the devils that could have crawled from hell, it had to be him. But what Colt didn't know, what none of them did yet, was that this wasn't just about a woman in chains. This was bait. And someone even more dangerous than Augustus Vane was already watching. The square didn't stay silent for long. A murmur rippled through the crowd like a snake through tall grim. Colt Mercer's bid had cracked the rhythm, but it was Augustus Vane's offer that shattered the illusion. $500 was more than any ranch hand would see in 5 years, let alone throw down on a chained nun. But Vane didn't blink. He wasn't buying a woman, he was buying control. Message sent. Colt stepped forward from the saloon's shade. His boots struck the hard-packed earth with a steady rhythm, the kind that made folks step back without meaning to. The air turned brittle charged like the seconds before a thunderclap. Granger swallowed hard, his hand still hovered above the gavel. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice warbling now, "we've got ourselves a high-stakes situation here." "The auction's over," Colt said flatly. His hand rested casually near his hip, but no one missed the tension in his stance. The tight coil behind his words. Everyone knew Colt Mercer wasn't bluff and bluster. He was a man who only drew when he intended to leave someone in the dust. Vane's smile widened. "You sure about that, Mercer?" His voice was smooth like syrup over glass. "'Cause last I checked, this town still ran on my law." Colt didn't answer. He looked at Evelyn, still bound, still silent, and saw her lips moving again. Not screaming, not pleading, praying. The defiance in it made his chest tighten. She wasn't waiting for a savior. She was already surviving. That's when the first rifle cracked. It came from the rooftop above the feed store, one of Vane's snipers. The shot missed wide, sparking against the dirt near Colt's boots. The warning was clear: leave now, or don't leave at all. Colt dove left, landing hard behind a water trough. Gunfire erupted like a hailstorm. The crowd scattered, screaming and stumbling over barrels and benches. Evelyn dropped to her knees on the block chains, rattling as she pressed herself as low as she could. Vane's voice roared across the chaos. "Take him alive. I want him to watch bullets tore through the air." Colt peeked around the trough's edge, eyes scanning. 3 shooters advancing from the left. 2 more holding near the general store. 1 circling around for a flank. 6 on 1. Bad odds. His hand moved on instinct, drawing and firing 3 shots in succession. One of Vane's men dropped with a scream, shoulder torn open. Another took cover behind a stack of crates. The third returned fire wildly, slamming bullets into the barrel inches from Colt's head. Then something strange happened. A voice rose above the gunfire. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. It was Sister Evelyn. Still kneeling, still shackled, but singing clear and calm, her voice slicing through smoke and fear like a church bell on Judgment Day. The shooting faltered. Not stopped entirely, but slowed, uncertain. Even killers, it seemed, had pieces of their souls left to recognize something pure. Or maybe it was just the surreal shock of hearing a hymn in the middle of a gunfight. Colt seized the moment. He rolled right, moving fast across open ground, firing as he ran. He reached the auction block, ducking behind it just as more shots rang out from above. Splinters flew. Dust choked the air. Granger, sweating like a hog in July, grabbed Evelyn by the chains and yanked her upright. A tiny derringer appeared from beneath his coat, pressed against her temple. "Don't move!" he shrieked, wild-eyed. "One more step and I paint the street with her brains." Colt froze. His revolver was halfway raised. He could make the shot, maybe, but he'd seen enough trembling hands and twitchy fingers to know that maybe was a gamble he couldn't afford. Behind him, Vane's voice rang out again. "Drop the iron, Mercer. Let's talk like gentlemen." Colt stared at Evelyn. Her song had stopped, but her eyes, they were locked on him again. No fear, no blame, just trust. Something inside him shifted, snapped and reformed. He lowered his weapon and dropped it to the ground. The Colt landed in the dust with a soft thud. Vane exhaled like a man savoring a fine cigar. "Smart choice. Now, kick it away." Colt did. "You surprise me," Mercer, Vane said, striding closer. "All this time I figured you were stone and fire, but here you are surrendering for a woman you just met." Colt smiled faintly, something dangerous in it. "That's the mistake," he said softly. Vane blinked. "What, you think I only carry 1 gun?" It wasn't a bluff, but Vane didn't get the chance to test it, because Evelyn Grace chose that moment to act. With a sudden motion, she twisted and sank her teeth into Granger's hand, the soft part between his thumb and finger. He screamed and the derringer fired, sending a bullet harmlessly into the sky. She wrenched free, stumbling back. Colt didn't hesitate. His boot knife was out in a flash, spinning through the air. It buried itself in Granger's chest with a meaty thud. The auctioneer crumpled like wet parchment. Gunfire resumed instantly. Vane's men opened up, but Colt was already moving, grabbing Evelyn's wrist and yanking her toward the general store. They sprinted through a hail of lead feet, pounding over dry planks, breath ragged. The saloon shattered behind them. A window blew out. Someone screamed. They dove inside the general store just as another bullet cracked the door frame. Inside, Evelyn pressed against the wall, gasping. Her white habit was streaked in blood and grit. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were alive. Fierce. Why, she asked between breaths, "Why are you helping me?" Colt checked his spare cylinder. 3 shots left. Because no one, he said, deserves to be bought like livestock. The general store's door slammed behind them, the sound echoing like a coffin lid sealing shut. Colt locked it with a snap and shoved a barrel against it for good measure. The gunfire outside had dulled to distant cracks. Vane's men were regrouping. The quiet inside felt unnatural, almost reverent. Evelyn leaned back against a shelf stacked with jars of dried beans and preserves, her chest rising and falling beneath the torn edges of her habit. Her braid had come half undone. Her cheeks were flushed, lips pale, but her eyes, they were sharp, alert. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. Colt didn't look at her. He was checking his spare rounds, jaw tight. Sure as hell did. But why? Her voice cracked, not from fear, but something more fragile. "You don't know me." He finally looked at her. "Don't need to. I know what they were gonna do. That's reason enough." She looked down at her hands. They were trembling, whether from adrenaline or something else, even she wasn't sure. Her fingers brushed against the wooden cross still dangling at her neck. "I bit that man," she whispered. I felt it. The bone under his skin. I didn't think, I just reacted." Colt sat on an overturned crate, loading a round into his revolver. "And I didn't feel ashamed. Not in the moment. I felt—" She swallowed hard. Satisfaction. The word hung in the air like smoke. Colt didn't blink. "Then you're alive." Her head snapped up. "What?" "That feeling. That rush, that fire in your blood, it means you're alive. Doesn't make you a monster, just makes you human." Evelyn turned away, arms crossed tight. "I used to think I was above it. The violence, the hate. I thought if I prayed enough I could keep it out. But it's in me." Colt stood slow and deliberate. He didn't get close, just stood beside the counter, keeping his voice low. "We all got shadows, sister. Some longer than others." She looked at him, then really looked at him. There was something in his stance, rigid but careful, like a man who knew how to draw and kill but also knew the cost of doing it too often. Before she could say anything more, the creak of a floorboard came from the back of the store. Colt raised his gun, instantly body coiled. "It's just me," came a weathered voice. Clara Finch, gray hair tied in a bun, stepped into the light holding a Spencer rifle as long as her arm. She was barefoot in an apron and dress, but her grip on the weapon didn't waver. "Put that cannon down," Clara, Colt said, lowering his own weapon. Clara's eyes swept over the two of them, Evelyn's torn habit, Colt's bloodied knuckles, the sounds of war outside. So she muttered, "This is what the devil brought into my store today. You should leave," Colt said. "Now." Clara didn't move. "I ain't survived 3 husbands, 2 winters without salt, and a Comanche raid just to be chased out of my own store by some gold-toothed peacock and his boys." Evelyn opened her mouth to speak, but Clara cut her off with a glance. "You're Evelyn Grace, right?" Evelyn hesitated. "Yes, Sister Evelyn Grace." "No," Clara said, eyes narrowing. "You're not." A stillness fell, again thicker than the gunpowder in the air. Clara stepped closer, rifle lowered now, voice quieter. "I delivered you in this very store 26 years ago, middle of a snowstorm. Your mother, Margaret O'Brien, prayed the whole time. She died right after. But I remember your face, those eyes, that chin." Evelyn backed away, shaking her head. "No, the sisters told me my parents died when I was a baby, that I was found." "They told you what they wanted you to believe," Clara interrupted. "Your mother died giving birth to your brother. Your father was Patrick Quinn, a gambler and a cheat who ran out of town before you could walk. You were raised in the convent, yes, but your name, your real name, is Kathleen Quinn." "No," Evelyn said, her voice barely audible. I'm not her." But even as she said it, the name felt familiar, like a coat she'd forgotten once belonged to her. Colt watched her carefully. "Quinn as in Jesse Quinn." Clara nodded. Her brother, Evelyn or Kathleen, sank onto a stool. Her face had gone pale as snowfall. "My brother," Clara's expression softened with age-earned sorrow. "He rides with a gang now, calls himself Quick Draw Jesse. Meaner than a snake when he's drunk. Killed a judge in Abilene and 2 lawmen in Dakota Territory. He's not the boy I once met." Colt cursed under his breath. That name carried weight. Even among killers, Jesse Quinn was infamous. Outside, the sounds of hooves drew near. Riders approaching fast, gunmen, the click of metal on leather. Kathleen looked toward the window, dazed. "He's here." "Vane lured you out," Colt said, voice low and sharp. "You weren't random. You were bait." Just then, Augustus Vane's voice floated in from the street like a chill. "Well now, Sister Quinn, how touching." Colt grabbed Kathleen's arm, pulling her from her stunned silence. "This is bigger than you, than him. Vane set this up. He knew Jesse would come for you." Clara chambered around. "We've got company." A whistle pierced the air, sharp, deliberate. Colt recognized it. Everyone did. Jesse Quinn's calling card. 5 riders crested the ridge outside of town, rifles across their backs, dust trailing their black coats. At the front rode a man with fire in his posture and death in his shadow. Kathleen looked out at him. "Jesse." Colt stood beside her, gun drawn, shoulders squared. "You're not just facing your brother," he said, voice hard now. "You're facing everything you've tried to bury." Kathleen's reply was steady, quiet, but laced with fire. "Then maybe it's time I stopped pretending to be someone I'm not." The whistle was unmistakable, low, sharp, carried on the wind like a warning too late to heed. Colt Mercer froze, instinct prickling across his skin. That sound wasn't for show. It was the signal every lawman west of the Mississippi had come to dread. Jesse Quinn had arrived. Kathleen Quinn, still wearing what was left of her nun's habit, turned slowly toward the window. She pushed the curtain back with shaking fingers and looked out. Her breath caught in her throat. 5 riders approached from the far ridge, dust curling around them like smoke. They came with the confidence of men who had never had to answer to the law rifles strapped across their backs, faces half covered in bandanas. But it was the man in front who made time stop. He rode easy, shoulders relaxed, but there was no mistaking the tension coiled in his frame. The kind of control born from killing quick and often. His black coat billowed behind him like a funeral flag. Even from this distance, Kathleen knew the set of his jaw, the way he leaned ever so slightly to the left, as if the world had tilted and only he had adapted. "Jessie." Colt stepped beside her, peering out through the same crack in the curtain. "That your brother?" She nodded. "God help us." Behind them, Clara Finch muttered something under her breath that didn't sound like a prayer. She checked the chamber on her Spencer rifle with the ease of a woman who'd kept it loaded through marriages, wars, and famines. If that's Jesse Quinn, this town's about to bleed. Outside, Augustus Vane stood near the auction block, unbothered by the rising tension. His men had taken cover behind barrels and storefronts, rifles trained on the general store, the saloon, and the church tower across the street. He twirled his silver-tipped cane like he was conducting an orchestra. Vane looked up at the riders approaching and gave a small, smug smile. Right on time. Kathleen's heart pounded in her ears. She hadn't seen Jesse since they were children, before she was whisked away to the convent, before he disappeared into outlaw legend. But somehow she'd always felt him out there like a shadow she couldn't outrun. Now he was here, drawn by blood rage and the twisted promise of vengeance. "Why now?" she asked aloud. "Why bring me into this?" Colt answered for her. "Because Vane's smart. He knew Jesse wouldn't walk into a trap unless someone he cared about was on the block. And I was the bait," she whispered. "Hell of a trap," Clara muttered. Then Jesse's voice rang out loud and chilling across the square. "Black-souled bastard, I know you're in there, Vane. Send out my sister, and maybe I'll make your death quick." His voice hadn't changed much, deeper sure, roughened by drink and desert wind, but the core of it fury wrapped in ice that was still Jesse. Kathleen stepped back from the window, face pale. "I have to go out there." "Like hell you do," Colt snapped, placing a hand on her arm. "You'll get yourself shot before you take 2 steps. He won't shoot me. You don't know that. He's my brother." "Yeah, and he's killed a dozen men who looked him in the eye." They were close now, breath to breath. The room was filled with the ticking of the store's old wall clock and the weight of a choice no prayer could fix. "I have to try," she said. "He's blood. Blood doesn't mean what you think it does," Colt replied. "It doesn't wash your sins away, and it sure as hell doesn't spare you from them." Kathleen's expression shifted, less fear, more fire. "I'm tired of hiding behind God and lies. I was raised to believe my past didn't matter, that faith could cleanse blood. But blood remembers. And today it came to collect." Colt didn't move. He couldn't. He saw the look in her eyes. She was no longer the terrified woman on the auction block. She had steel now. A storm had rolled in behind her ribs. "I walk out there," she said, "and maybe I can end this without more killing. And maybe you die trying. I can't stay in here while others die for me." Before Colt could stop her, she bent down and picked up the revolver he'd dropped earlier. Her hands moved too confidently for someone who claimed to renounce violence. She flipped open the cylinder, checked the rounds, and closed it with a practiced flick of the wrist. Clara stared, stunned. "Where'd you learn to handle a gun like that?" Kathleen didn't answer right away. She simply looked at the weapon like it was an old memory resurrected and said softly, "My brother taught me. When I was 12, before I ever saw the inside of a chapel. Before I ever believed in mercy." Colt stood there watching her. There was something unspoken between them, a knowing that passed without words. He could see it clearly now. The nun was gone. The woman standing before him was someone else entirely. Maybe someone she was always meant to be. "You walk out that door," Colt warned, "you'll be facing the truth." Kathleen nodded, holstering the revolver like it belonged there. "Then it's time I stopped lying to myself." A voice outside barked, "5 seconds, Vane." "Then we come in blazing." Kathleen moved to the door. Colt followed her not to stop her this time, but to stand behind her whatever came next. She looked back once more at Clara, who stood with the rifle leveled. "Thank you for the truth," she said. Clara's eyes glistened, but her voice was steady. "Go get your brother before this town burns to ash." With a breath that felt like both a curse and a prayer, Kathleen Quinn stepped out into the street, torn habit whipping in the wind, revolver strapped to her hip, and her past rising up to meet her like a thunderhead over the plains. Dust swirled around Kathleen Quinn like ghosts of the past as she stepped out of the general store, her boots pressing into the sun-baked dirt of Perdition's main street. The revolver at her hip felt heavier than its weight suggested, loaded not just with lead but with bloodlines and choices that could never be taken back. Her torn habit fluttered behind her like the remnants of an identity she was finally ready to let go. Across the square, Jesse Quinn sat atop a black gelding, his eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. Even from 30 yards out, there was no mistaking the face that mirrored her own, same eyes, same sharp cheekbones, though his were hardened now by violence and dust. He pulled down his bandana, revealing a mouth set in something between a smile and a snarl. "Katie," he called out, using the name no one else dared. His voice was ragged, worn down by years of smoke and gunpowder. "What did they do to you?" Kathleen didn't flinch. "They didn't do anything I didn't already do to myself." Jesse's expression flickered. "You look like hell." "I've been there," she said. "Came back different." Behind Kathleen, the general store door creaked open. Colt Mercer stepped out beside her, revolver drawn but held low. Clara Finch followed with her old Spencer rifle leveled steady as ever. On the other side of the street, Augustus Vane emerged from behind his carriage, shotgun in hand, his gold teeth flashing under the brim of his hat like a snake baring its fangs. "You can all lower your weapons," Vane called out. "This is between the siblings now." But no one moved. The street had become a powder keg waiting for a spark. Jesse leaned forward in the saddle. "Come on, Katie. You and me, we don't belong in this hole. Let's ride out. Forget this town. Forget these people." Kathleen's eyes didn't leave his. "You burned a schoolhouse in Dakota, Jesse, with children inside." He didn't answer. "You killed lawmen who never drew on you. You took what you wanted, no matter the cost. I know who you are." "I did what I had to," he said low. "So did Ma. So did Pa. The world takes and takes until you learn to take back." "No," she said, voice steady, louder now. "That's what you told yourself to sleep at night. That's not truth. It's rot dressed up as reason." His hand drifted toward his revolver, slow, testing her. "You really gonna raise iron on your own brother?" he asked. "If I have to," she replied. "You're still blood. I was your sister when you robbed that silver shipment, Jesse. When you said, 'This is for what they did to my sister.'" "What did you mean by that?" Jesse's jaw clenched. "They broke you, put you in chains, sold you like cattle." "No, Jesse," she said, tears rising but refusing to fall. "You brought this on me. You're the reason I was bait. You lit the fuse and called it vengeance." And just like that, Jesse Quinn drew. He was faster than nearly any man alive. His revolver cleared leather in the blink of an eye. But Kathleen was faster. Her shot rang out like thunder over the street. Jesse's gun spun from his hand, blood erupting from his wrist as he cried out, dropping to his knees. He clutched the wound eyes wide, not in pain but in disbelief. "You shot me," he rasped. "I shot your gun hand," she said, breath heaving, voice breaking. "You'll live, but you're done killing." Vane's men tensed, rifles rising, but they were met by return fire. Colt fired twice in rapid succession, dropping one of Jesse's gang members and forcing another behind a barrel. Clara's Spencer cracked like lightning, and a third rider tumbled from his horse rifle, clattering. The last two gang members looked to Jesse, still on his knees, still bleeding, and saw no orders coming. They fled, hard and fast, like the devil was behind them. Across the square, Augustus Vane lowered his shotgun slowly. His grin had faded, the gold teeth now catching sunlight with something more like shame than menace. "Well," he drawled, "seems I miscalculated." He looked at Kathleen. "I don't suppose you'll be going back to the convent after this." She looked down at her hands, at the revolver still smoking. Her fingers were steady. "No," she said. "I don't think I will." Colt stepped beside her. His eyes searched hers, not for weakness, not for guilt, but for clarity. "You all right?" "No," she admitted. "But I'm still standing." Jesse groaned, trying to rise. Colt stepped forward, cuffing him with a pair he'd kept since the old Marshall days. "You've got a date with territorial justice," he muttered, tightening the chains. Jesse didn't fight. His pride had been bled dry by his own sister's bullet. That night the fires were put out. The wounded were tended to. Jesse Quinn was locked in the back of a prison wagon and sent south under heavy guard. Augustus Vane. He left town without another word, too proud to admit defeat, too smart to test his luck further. He never came back. And Kathleen. She stayed. She shed the name Sister Grace like an old skin. But she didn't abandon her beliefs. Instead, she built something new, something fierce and grounded. She worked beside Clara Finch, tending to the general store, helping travelers who came through perdition. She kept her revolver on one hip and her wooden cross on the other. In the evenings, she and Colt would sit out on Clara's front porch, watching the horizon shift from gold to indigo, speaking little. There was a comfort in the silence. A peace born not from forgetting, but from surviving. "You think we'll ever get used to it?" she asked him once. Colt looked at her, then at the land before them. "Not sure we're supposed to." She smiled, slow and real. "Then maybe that's the point." The dust never quite settled in perdition, but the town felt different now, quieter, watchful, like it had held its breath during the storm and hadn't fully exhaled since. Word of the shootout traveled fast. Folks who once cowered beneath Vane's thumb now stood a little taller when they passed the general store. The man with the gold teeth hadn't returned, and the outlaw with the fastest draw in 3 territories was on his way to face a judge. But the biggest change wasn't in the streets. It was in Kathleen Quinn. Gone was the veil of Sister Evelyn Grace, the name she'd worn like armor in the convent halls. In its place stood a woman who no longer hid from her lineage or from her own strength. Kathleen didn't return to the church, but she didn't abandon her faith either. She kept the wooden cross at her neck, not because she was holy, but because she understood now that faith wasn't about cloisters or habits. It was about what you chose to protect when everything else was burning. She stayed in perdition and worked alongside Clara Finch, learning the rhythms of the town, the barter system, how to talk down drunks and chase off wolves. She kept a gun under the counter. No one questioned it. And Colt Mercer stayed too. He'd come to perdition a ghost, a man whose past wore him like a second skin, but in Kathleen he saw something rare, not just redemption, not just courage. He saw someone who didn't need saving. And chose him anyway. That mattered more than any gunfight ever had. They didn't call what they had love, not out loud, but some evenings you could find them sitting on the porch outside Clara's store, sipping weak coffee and watching the sky turn orange over the horizon. They didn't speak much. Didn't have to. They'd both already said everything that mattered, with bullets, with trust, with the way they never once left each other's side. As summer turned to fall, Colt started fixing up a cabin just north of town. No one asked questions. Kathleen started planting herbs behind the store. People brought their fevers, their children, their stories, and she listened. She wasn't a nun anymore. She was something rarer, a woman who had seen the worst in people and still chose to do good. One evening, weeks after Jesse Quinn had been carted away, Kathleen stood behind the counter sorting inventory when a stranger asked, "Ain't you the one who shot that outlaw, the Quinn girl?" She paused for a breath and smiled politely. That's one part of the story, but not the whole. Because the truth was, she hadn't just shot a man, she'd severed a bloodline of violence with a single pull of the trigger. Not to end it with death, but to stop it from defining her any longer. That night on the porch, Colt asked her something quietly. "Do you regret it?" She didn't pretend not to know what he meant. "I regret not doing it sooner," she said. He nodded, satisfied with the answer. The sun dipped behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the town that had once been a place of chains and auctions. Now it was something else, not a paradise, not a sanctuary, but maybe a beginning. And sometimes that's how the best stories end, not with glory, not with happily ever afters, but with two broken souls choosing every day to be better than their pasts. Choosing to protect each other, to walk through fire not because they had to, but because they refused to let the fire win. Sometimes redemption doesn't come from prayer, it comes from choosing not to repeat the pain that shaped you. This story isn't about heroes in white hats or villains in black, it's about the vast gray in between. Kathleen Quinn was raised to believe that holiness meant hiding from the violence in her blood. But when forced to face the brother she once loved and the evil that used her as bait, she realized the truth. It's not your past that defines you. It's what you do when it rises again. She didn't stop being faithful when she picked up the gun. She didn't lose her soul when she pulled the trigger. She reclaimed it because sometimes choosing to fight is the only way to protect what matters. And Colt Mercer, the haunted gunman, didn't save her. He stood beside her as she saved herself, and in doing so, gave him back his own purpose. This story reminds us that faith and fire can live in the same heart. That broken people can find wholeness not by erasing their past, but by writing a new ending. It's not about being pure, it's about being real. Owning your scars, choosing mercy without becoming a victim. Drawing lines you won't let the world cross again. Because sometimes the most powerful redemption isn't offered by God or the law. Sometimes it's earned in the dust, by two people who've seen hell and still choose to protect what's good. If stories like this stir something in your soul, if you crave tales of quiet courage, redemption through action, and characters who walk the line between justice and grace, then Frontier Reverie was made for you. Hit subscribe and join our campfire circle where every story dares to ask what it means to be human on the edge of the world. New Western tales every week, raw, real, unforgettable. Don't just watch the frontier, feel it.